where the I don't know, the CPRC, Citizens Police Review Commission, is going to, after 2 years of not doing anything, not even, they just barely got their, whatever they call it. I forget what they call it. Their committee together, the commissioners, their, what is it called for a nonprofit and thing? Their guidelines together. I know there's another word I'm missing. They just voted on that. So it took them 2 years to do that from when they were found by city council to hold the police accountable. So for 2 years they've done nothing, and the police have been able to bypass them entirely because several people on the committee are from out of town. They're MAGA, pro police, pro police corruption. Pro-police abuse, pro-police violence, which means you're not pro-police, you're just for the violence. And that's that colonial spirit again. That's that white supremacist spirit again. And so that's what's going on now. We're in about half an hour or less. Another Waymo, automated car, no driver. So yeah, for 2 years they didn't finish setting up their commission. Now they bylaws. That's what I'm looking for, the bylaws. So it took them 2 years to set up the bylaws for their commission. They haven't done anything. All these commissions are just show anyway. They give recommendations, and the city has and the police have no. There's no force on the recommendations. They're not rules. They're just suggestions. And we know that fascists don't listen to suggestions from citizens. So we're gonna go live stream this event if they let us. We'll see. It's under the Texas Open Government statute law, statutory law. They have to let you film in there. They can't not let you film. So we'll see what happens. This is a pretty plant. It's a pretty plant. It smells like grapes. It's a mountain laurel. It's a mescalito plant. The Native Americans used the seed beads to see God. So it's got mescaline in it. It's a long history. How's it going?
Good, how are you?
Good.
If you don't mind.
Can you put all this in there? Mm-hmm. I got a wallet. I think that's it. Oh, belt.
Mm-hmm. Normally no, but it's got so many holes, you know what I mean?
It's not 3 yet, is it? It's really getting close. Almost 3.
Oh,
Is it? Dang it. Took me a little while to walk over here, I guess. I'm late. Dang it. I thought I had 30 minutes. The traffic in Austin and walking across the bridge.
Atrocious.
Yeah. My friend's friend just got a hit and run murder like 3 days ago on Congress. She got ran over. So, yeah. It's dangerous out there. Yeah. Oh, you too. Oop, upside down. Is it better going? Crap. Is it good?
An administrative warrant, whether it's paid, when they responded to the trash, often in more food. Just so you can have some transparency about what's going on, what's really going on, if we can see the data, instead of words, I think that would be helpful. Also developing trainings on how officers interact with people that they might pull over or come in contact with regarding informing them of whether they're actually detained or if they're free to leave, especially if they are going to be calling on an administrative warrant, which I understand there's now steps in place where they have to get supervisory approval. But most people on the street don't understand whether they're being detained or if they're free to leave.
Can't hear you. Commissioner Russell, can't hear you. Right. You should. We'd like to start with staff briefing regarding progress of work with police technology units and internal drives with security success cases.
Thank you, Chair. Gil McCann, Director, also Police Oversight. As of January, this January CPRC meeting, APO reported that we have received Kenya, noting that there were cases that were missing in terms of the cases that have been transferred for your review. So once we received that information, my staff and I met with the Police Technology Unit and the CTM, which is the Communications and Technology Management Unit. Commissioner Lisa Davis, Chief of Police. For having me on, I'm happy to be here and certainly to answer questions, and these were all very good questions. I know there's a lot of passion around this. I feel it. Not only here but across the country. We know that we see it, and the changes that we're making to our policy are going to reflect that. I think, to Gail's point, they've seen, again, a lot of eyes have been on council members have seen these changes. They've made recommendations there. They've offered recommendations. So it has been around, and hopefully the hope is to get it into action here in the next week or so. But with that, those changes, officers immediately, once the we had the female and the child that were reported, once that happened under an administrative warrant, those changes were made immediately through our training, through our training bulletin, mass emails, show ups, several calls, show ups, that happened. So the changes are occurring as far as the way we handle those administrative warrants. Duty to intervene. We absolutely have, it's under state law that officers, we do have a duty to intervene when we see excessive force, when we see crimes being committed. That is absolutely something. And then the ABLE training that we have, active bystander for law enforcement, we have ABLE training that officers respond to, that were trained early on. So that training is happening, and there absolutely is an expectation, not only for our own officers, if they were to see illegal happenings with a peer, that we do that. So those are things that are happening.
Thank you for attending, Chief Davis. Appreciate you being here. So what was the outcome with regards to the administrative warrant? What's the status?
So administrative warrants that, listen, I would love to be able to say, we're not responding to any of the thing that we're dealing with, but under Senate Bill 4 and listening to the legal advice from our city, those are something that falls under Senate Bill 4. And so when an officer has legally detained someone, so we're talking about they're already being detained for another reason, a criminal reason, and it's come to our attention that they have an administrative warrant. If we are not taking any further action, say we're just issuing a citation, that will then fall into, if the officer may, but is not required to call ICE. And the majority of times our officers are not calling ICE. But if they do decide to call ICE and say, we have someone here with an administrative warrant, that officer would then call a duty chief who would then make that decision on whether they're going to be sticking around for that ICE agent to show up. And again, the priority, and that being a commander. So the priority, certainly that's coming from me and the executive staff, is we are an agency that's critically understaffed and certainly don't have time to wait for an administrative civil warrant for ICE to show up. So once we clear that scene, if we clear that scene, again, that's going to be the decision of that commander, again, understanding what our priorities are. The officer would then clear the scene at that point.
So the officer at the scene would call their commander first.
No, they would call ICE and then they would call us later. They understand it before we cannot reasonably restrict them from doing so. But again, the amount of calls, you imagine in February of 2025, over 700,000 of these administrative warrants were put in by ICE across the country. And so officers are coming across these that they've never had before. And so just since February 2025, it suspiciously looks very similar, I believe, to a detainer warrant. The administrative warrants are very similar. So those warrants are saying, when you're looking at those, call ICE at this number. And so the officers are, they're following that. And that's the point. It was imperative for us to get that information to ensure that they understood the difference between a detainer and an administrative warrant. So this wasn't anything from our office to push officers to do this more. It was just the opposite. This is understanding what this looks like. This is a civil detainer. This is not a civil warrant. This is not the same thing as a detainer, and how they can proceed with that if they choose to call ICE. Again, staying in sync with Senate Bill 4.
That's a question. For me, a part of the confusion is things that the order in which the officer proceeds, whether he calls ICE first, or he calls the commander first, right? I'm not quite sure why do not call the commander first. I'll tell you, as a citizen, I would prefer if we prioritize all the things. I think a commander is in a better position to tell that officer what is, what's more important. I need you somewhere else more, etc. And so, no quite why the process is call ICE first, then call the commander after. Or if it's optional, because the officer has the option to say, I'll call my commander first, make sure I know how to proceed.
Yeah, this is advice we're getting to stay in compliance with Senate Bill 4. And so when you think about, again, the majority of officers are not taking that step to call ICE. But if one decides to do so, these are the steps that will be put in place to monitor. And again, to another question that was here, we give quarterly to the council. There is quarterly, and it's on, I'm not sure what public site it is, Chief of Staff Rogers may know, but we document every interaction we have where ICE is called. That is documented. And whether that's for a detainer that we're actually taking someone to jail, that is given to council quarterly. So that is being captured. And that is put out on the website. So that is the public knowledge.
So the fourth order is for them to call ICE first, then call.
If they choose to do that.
But you handle help prioritize other horses. And you're sure of officers, that we don't have enough officers to do the regular thing. So the hope is that Commander can help prioritize that. I think
And that is correct. That is my hope, is again understanding what our priorities are as an agency. And it is not, we have many things that we would rather do, that we need to do as an agency. So that is exactly right.
But each officer has the discretion of what they're going.
That is correct.
I mean, what is they doing to proactively get this message into the community that we hear this?
Yeah, that's absolutely important. And one of the things that is learning is meeting with the Hispanic leaders, meeting with APLA, meeting with the churches, all of those groups, and we're doing that. And so we have a meeting, I believe, March 11th with a large group to kind of go over the general orders and how that's looking, as well as how we get that information out. And another thing we did from those meetings is how do we create, because we know this is a group of Austinites that is so underreported crime anyway, right? They don't report crime or victimization. And so how do we, again, with this, understanding the irony, of telling people to call us, and this is happening. So how can we look outside the box, step outside the box, and how can we ensure people to trust us to call? And so we're looking at our victim services unit. Austin is very fortunate. We have over 52 victim services assistants here. And you think social workers and all the people from victims of crime, and creating a space where if forgiveness is crime, may not be active. Say you're a victim of an assault, and an hour later the suspect's not there. It's safe for you to call. They could call a victim service person, who will then kind of act as an in-between intermediary for filing a police report and make them feel more comfortable and confident about reporting crime cases. So that's something that we're taking a look at as well. And then how do we take a step, certainly under certain crimes that fit under the visa process, and how do we go and move forward with that? So we don't want to delay people that want to report and want to assist with prosecution, assist with the investigation.
What is the new visa process?
The new visa is for certain crimes, so you're thinking of domestic violence, robberies, your more violent crimes that fall under. There's a process where if you will cooperate with law enforcement for that crime, you can stay in they will help you get a visa to stay in.
Yeah, one of the things that I'm more impactful of that need was testimony of a young woman, and she spoke in Spanish. And I guess the best my translation was that, you're leaving our faith at the whim of a police officer for the call. And because there's a lot of protection. That was a hard statement. But no, I understand how you high five, take off. But that is at the heart of some of the concerns that still relying on whim of, the officer decides to call or not. So I think that here's the going.
Hello. Yes, I'd like to comment. Hello, Chief Davis. I have a couple questions. Could you tell me what those immediate changes that you said you made after that incident are? Because I heard that you said that there are immediate changes and then you shifted into state law. So I don't want to conflate the two.
Yeah, there's immediate changes of being that they will notify a commander. If they do make that decision, then it will then rise to the level of a commander.
So what was it before?
It was just a supervisor with a sergeant they can notify.
Okay, so it escalated from a sergeant to a commander. And where does that information go? So they're notified that I just called ICE. And then what?
So it's captured. So it's a form form number we actually fill out.
So there's a requirement to write a policy, to write a report. So whether or not the officer makes that detention or not, they're going to have to write the report. Those are what we use to report out to council on a quarterly basis. But in the past, there was just a requirement to notify supervisor and get that. At this point, we put in place that requirement that they contact the duty commander, who will then look at what resources are available and then be the ultimate decision maker on that. And then that supervisor and the officer will be responsible for writing a report to document that interaction, and then what decision was reached, and then which of those items that they looked at, the resources, whether this was a victim, things of that nature, in order to and we put in place through our operational bulletin within probably less than a week after this occurred in very early January. So, my I don't have since then this process works.
So, okay, we're documenting, but that's what I'm saying. What happens after that? So we logged it. We know something happened. Got it. So their supervisor collaborated with them after they reported. What's the follow-on after that, or is it just okay, we logged it? Because just collecting data doesn't really bring about change. We just know that something happened and it's date and time stamp. But what I'm hearing from the people that spoke up and just even my fellow residents is people are afraid of the report, people are afraid to engage with the police. This is affecting community relationships. How is it capture data? I mean, you say I think the officer has autonomy to go ahead and report and then notify. How is that really effectuating change and allowing people to feel that trust. I understand you have these secondary tertiary services where they can reach out to these advocates and then they can help them report, but that doesn't deal with the root cause of the problem, which is people are afraid to report because there's an agency detaining people or asking for people to be detained because of non-judicial warrants. So how does capturing that actually turn into action is what I'm missing.
I don't know what the action is that, again, it's important to capture this, what they're doing, whether I showed up, whether I didn't show up, and that's captured as well. But I think this goes beyond, the question is, how do we set up, again, areas where people can feel confident to report crime? We are a victim-centered agency, and you look at crime, and you look at the way we report, we do not ask immigration status of anybody. We do not ask that. Even in looking at the video camera of the lady and the child that were deported, not one time did it come up what their immigration status was. That was never asked. So we don't do that. And when we respond to a victim call, unless there's some criminality or there's a need to run that individual, that person's being ran to get that immigration status. So those are a few things that we're doing in place. And I do feel, again, rising to the level to a commander who's making that decision, taking that out of the hand. Yes, an officer may do that, but it's going to be captured. It's going to be captured who it was that asked, when they asked, and that will be, we will have that information.
Right, but what I'm saying is the decision's already been made. They've already called
That's
that.
right. Yes.
So that's being reactive. Now I told my supervisor, but I still didn't know whether or not that commander said stay on scene or hold them, whatever. That's a whole nother conversation, but the action is already called. So if I'm an officer and I have a certain feeling or sentiment, whether it's political or personal, about a certain group of people and how they should be reported, you're empowering me, give me the autonomy to report them, and then you're telling me to report that you're reporting. That's what will still allow for the fear and the lack of interaction and trust between the community and the citizens to prevail. Is that I'm not asking you to go against state law, but what I'm saying is because state law is being used as an enabling device or justification to do these sort of actions on an officer-by-officer basis, all officers are going to get painted with a broad paintbrush, and you're not going to know who you can trust. You don't know if someone, because, like you said, your policy is not to ask those status. However, those warrants show up in the system whether you ask the question or not. Am I correct? So it's not like you ask the question and all of a sudden you call ICE. There's already an administrative warrant for this individual, and then this officer chooses to act on it. So whether or not you ask the question is irrelevant because the data is already there and it's there for them to see. And then they decide to take action. Do you understand
No,
what
I
I'm
totally
saying?
understand what you're saying. I do, and you are correct. There may be officers that absolutely feel that this is within their right to do, and Senate Bill 4 does allow for that. So how do we, as we're looking at the training behind this, one of the other things we're doing is bringing officers in for in-service training, 2 days of in-service training. And this is in-service, in-person training at the academy that is talking about, state mandated things, but also what we as an agency, what our priorities are. Immigration will be one of those things we talk about, and we will be talking about what the administrative warrant is, what a detainer is, what our goals are as an agency, and what Senate Bill 4 means, all of those things. But to your point, it does tie the hands of certainly police chiefs throughout the state when they're looking at this Senate bill, and that is absolutely true.
Bishop Russell had her hand up. Sorry.
I just have a question for the commission and for Anthony as well. Where can I go to educate myself, commissioner, on what APD is legally required to do with ICE? When they do come across someone who is undocumented, and what they are what they're required to do and what their procedures are, where can I go to educate myself? Is it all in Senate Bill 4?
I think Senate Bill 4 is a good one, and then our policies are online that you can review, again, even though that the general orders for immigration will be changing. That is another place where you can go and really look at that as well.
Okay, it's in the general orders as
Yes.
well? Okay, great. Okay,
Yeah, it seems clear that state laws have put in a local police force between a rock and a hard place. And making your job harder, giving you things to focus on, deal with that are not within what we decided on local. So I appreciate that it seems like trying to just create a culture that's going to prevent some road activity outside of APD.
That is absolutely true. And I do want to say this, we've had several officers within APD whose own families. So this is, it is affecting everybody. So as we look at these things, it is important that we remember that as well, but it is a cultural thing, again, while we're staying within the laws.
I'd say my comment on that one of the reasons I brought this is because I know people have been asking for change and so forth, but sometimes it's on what is it more control. And I know at that meeting, once again, it was suggested that you should defy state law and challenge it. And my recommendation.
Well, I think you have to look at how do we make these changes within the law to be smart, right? And that's what we need to do. I love, many of us would love to get out and we all want to be on the right side of this. We all want to, stand up and beat our chest at some things, but the reality is we're going to be able to handle this as we work within it and we will set policies in place. And I feel that's
The way to change it is to vote.
I have a follow-on question, and that is, while staying under the parameters of the law and everyone doing their due diligence, and if someone chooses to report or not, how do we message to the citizens that what the actual policy and relationship is of the Austin Police Department with federal officials? Because right now I'm not really hearing that. I'm just hearing where is them to contact the commander, and this is not in our list of priorities, and they may be told to let those people go or whatever because of the administrative warrant versus the judicial warrant. But I'm not hearing what your actual relationship is with those federal authorities. Is it symbiotic? Is it collaborative? Is it mutually supportive? Is it we do what's within our purview and they do what's in their purview? I'm not understanding how the relationship actually works with the agency.
Yeah, we do not do operations with ICE. Under Senate Bill 4, if they were to call and ask, we need traffic blocked, we need this done, and if we have the resources, we have to send those to do those things. But we do not do ICE operations where immigration is involved with ICE.
Okay, operate directly with ICE and like joint
No.
operations, but if they needed local support and if available, then by Senate bill, you're obligated to give that support.
Yes.
And then to understand availability, what is your authorized level as far as police officers, and what do you currently have as far as staff?
I think availability, we look like, what do we need, another 400 officers on patrol alone? So we are significantly understaffed.
Pretty close number, close enough.
Okay, so it would be suffice to say that with that understaffing and what you said before, that the enforcement of ICE priorities is very low as compared to your role in serving the community as a whole, because the bandwidth and capacity that you're at right now.
That's exactly it.
Thank you.
Related subject is the General Order 330. That's talked about status inquiry. You kind of mentioned position.
I think you're muted, Carlos.
Sorry,
Thank you.
and say anything before this there. The unrelated topic with General Order 330, which talks about status inquiry, and I know it's you mentioned it for what can and cannot police officers should not ask for. Right? There was one of the, I guess, the contact from Office of Investigation had request specifically some clarification of that. And my perspective, I have seen in some of our cases where sometimes police officers have someone suspected of drunk and ask for license or passport. When I hear passport, yes, that's a questionable inquiry that borders on immigration status. So I would like to ensure it's clear that all you ask for is identification, and that you go through that the process there is informing them of their rights as a foreign national. I think it's if one finds out that they don't have identification, and it's clear that they're not supposed to, they can't prolong the detention. So I'm looking for some clarification to make sure that I understand, that we understand that the limitations of that General Order and what the official positions are. I know something's changing, but maybe.
So I've been here for 25 years. It's always been our practice to not focus on immigration status. As Chief described, we've always been very victim-centric. But one of the things that we're required to do is identify the individual that we're talking to, especially when it deals with a potential criminal offense, whether that be as simple as a traffic citation, making sure that we're trying to identify that individual. So I think that when asking for a driver's license, recognizing that there's a lot of people in the community that may not have a driver's license, but seeking some sort of identification, oftentimes a passport may be a type of identification that is a valid identification that would positively identify who an individual is at the scene, be able to finish that traffic stop without delay, to not prolong that detention as you described, get that information, issue that citation, and move them along their way. Policy does allow to inquire for immigration status under certain circumstances, but it also requires that the officer let the individual know that they do not have to release that, to provide that information to the officer. But it's always been a function more of positively identifying who the individual is when they don't possess something like a state driver's license.
Yeah, I'm not sure, but the hundred was here, right? Do you want to specifically, I give you an opportunity to specifically clarify what your concern was about General Order 330? Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Director Peter Hunt, Council Justice Coalition. So General Order 330 right now, I did see some changes in effect shortly after this question, and I will look forward to seeing what comes out. I think that you said sometime next week from their review, because I know there have been some more substantial changes that have been talked about by the Civil Rights Project. But in particular, I think that part of my concern with 330 also got something that the commissioners were asking about, which is the order of operations of contact ICE officers. If there really is going to be sort of this serious bandwidth issue, then it seems like there should be much stronger clarification through 330 about how administrative warrants are handled. There's a lot of talk about addressing immigration status, but asking about immigration status is distinct from having policies that cover how administrative warrant is going to be covered. In particular, these are very new, and I would like to see them called out specifically and addressed more directly. This is something that, there's obviously a lot of police experience in the city, but the ways in which administrative warrants are being integrated into the system do seem new and relatively recent. I think that 330 should cover policies for how that's actually going to be integrated. That's sort of answer your question.
Yeah, actually, yeah. We are waiting for the lawyers to, part of our, the commission, I'm looking at 450 pages, so we're trying to look at all things.
Yeah, and if I may, I do, the reason in February of 25 is when those 700,000 administrative warrants, those had not been in the system before then. And so this was a new thing. So you imagine that was February. This incident was in late December, early January. For one of these incidents, one of these administrative warrants for us to deal with, and unfortunately, great consequences from it. So that's why it's important that we lay out the differences, and it is laid out, very succinct, very different between what a detainer is and what an administrative warrant is.
Any questions, anyone from the commission?
I just have a follow-up question, Commissioner Briggs. Yes, Chief David, my question goes to the scenario that we heard described where someone was taken to a facility and then held without showering and then detained for 3 months. Is that a typical experience dealing with immigration or actually any of your intake processes?
I don't know. That would have to be something for the sheriff's department. That's 236. That is a sheriff's and a jail rule. That is not anything that PD deals with.
Okay. And then my other question or concern is we have elections coming up, both they're happening now, but also in November. What should citizens expect as far as ICE interactions at polling places? And will that, or even in our courthouses, do we have a policy that will protect citizens from being unlawfully not just detained, but screened or affected adversely where they wouldn't even want to show up to participate in, because one commissioner said, if you want to change something, we should vote. But if people are too afraid to vote, do we have safeguards locally in policy that will ensure the community that it is safe to vote?
I think all of our polling places is always directed patrols that officers are doing because you have large crowds. So officers may be in the area, certainly not going toward the polling places, but being in the area where that is occurring. I know that the federal a federal official posted something that ICE would not be at polling places. That is something that was said. So again, these conversations are being had. Sheriffs, the Travis County Sheriff's Office, all of those, again, understanding how big our elections are, a lot of people out. And so those things you'll see officers that are in those spaces just with large crowds. Again, I think that's just something that happens on every election.
No, I'm understanding that, but what I'm saying is, as you talk about duty to intervene and other things, will there be clear boundaries to ensure citizens are protected and it doesn't turn into an environment where people understand that, of course, large crowds, there's going to be a presence, but the police are there to protect them, not intimidate and detain, is what I'm asking.
I guess as far as getting that message out and doing a good public information about that, yes, we can do that.
Okay, yeah, I think that's really vital to helping restore the trust and credibility, just because it's not a normal time that most of us have endured, and I'm glad that you are reaching out to the Latin community, but there are obviously, you look at a place like Minnesota, there are Somali people who also are getting profiled and victimized. We need to be looking out for all people, because even the victims of shooting were not Latin or Somali. And so I think we need to be as inclusive as possible and ensure the community that we are here to help them.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Really appreciate it. I appreciate it. Item 6 now, this goes back to more CBRC case review working group started. Commissioner Floor, because how things going, your triage process, feedback.
Information. We haven't got a good number. I hope the teams that are reviewing the cases, if you guys have any feedback for us or you need more information or want to understand our process, please feel free to reach out and we're trying to make it as efficient and effective as manner.
Yeah, this is,
It's just every priority, so that has a understand it's really high priority. We're just going to happen on it really quickly. You just or close it out, you won't be able to get any input. So it's just that's basically our system. But that's verbal. So we'll definitely give you the written version of that, and that's how we break and store everything.
Okay, thank you. Another thing we should you and Commissioner Professor had a written procedure how that was being done. Find that in the copy for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. I know she has. She's really good at keeping good at making things work. But yeah, we'll definitely get the information.
Commissioner, 2 Commissioner 5, and then we prioritize it distributing working groups. 3, and the idea is that the working groups will sit down, deliberate, and do the larger body for the general recommendation. Agree or disagree with what the intent long term is that this is done before the police chief has the rules on the disciplinary action, so that they'll have that input and be able to use our input in turn. We so far behind that that's not the case. Most of the ones who reviewed are ones that already have been reviewed, and I still see a value in discussing those publicly, because then the community gets an idea of how these commissioners are seeing these cases, how they're progressing. Actually, sometimes there's an opportunity for the devil's advocate, the point of view on, have you noticed this in the reviews? And that's our basis also to give recommendations for APO and APD and how we think these. So this item 7 basically has a list of 2 cases per group that we will be asked for them to review. I'm not sure how many of these have been reviewed, but what we're expecting for the next few minutes is each working group will tell us maybe a summary of if they got a chance to look at the group, look at the cases, and any general conclusions of the. So, like maybe a member of commissioner of commission, working group A, maybe you want to speak to that for the project. Maybe the only member of that. No, I think you man, you guys are okay, right?
you're, or, so,
all private information. We're new. The whole idea is to come about and especially case studies that have great operating things. Just give us a case, you do one person things out of job and then of course we don't get an agreement. One thing that I the present system requires a unanimous agreement between the working group, the board president, to the larger group. And I think some of us have faced one challenge to that. Actually, now is not the time to think about it. See where a case where we have who won. But here, I would personally like to hear that even minority represented. So a case like this one is a case where it's not decided to vote and pass. Or we
Yeah, and some of those, at least, go maybe some of the officer depositions and things went out of their life. And that's why, from, so there was a tasing incident and then there was a shooting. And I think we agreed that the tasing was appropriate on the officers that took the day. And I think that's what we were waiting for. Officer opinion was to get more information on that.
at the same time, but one of the things I would suggest in this form is just maybe start by the case number, it's a brief description of the case, then the happy committee, especially the other commissioners, get up to for all what the things that put them on the spot. But did you guys have a chance? I know there were two cases assigned to you. The other case was 2025-02-113. Did you guys have a chance to look at that one? Yes. Peter, man, did you guys look at it?
I looked at it, yes, but we did not have a group discussion specific to that one.
Yeah, well, I will tell you, my perspective is that once again, is that any view of any commissioner in a KCS review is something that's appropriate the community may want to know. We're not going to render a conclusion and agreement, but I'd like, if you have any particular comments on what you saw and your particular view of it, I would
Yes, I questioned in my mind whether it was really something that needed to come up to this group. It was a a case where there was like an ex-husband that supposedly accessed some APD systems to find out some identification for the ex-wife's new beau, put it that way. And from everything I saw, that they did an access that the suspect or whatever, the police officer, did not directly impact or access any of the APD systems to find that, where this person lived or any of that kind of stuff. That there was some rough housing with their son, and it kind of got out of control, and violation of court orders for child control and custody. I'm not really sure that it's okay here. I don't know, if anybody else has any. I didn't think that there was sufficient information to really do anything to the officer involved. There didn't seem to be any concrete information.
So I can give you the perspective when we triage it, right? And that is, we look at the officer both on and off duty, because if you look, there's a lot of, and we get to see like all the cases holistically as far as, and so we pick up on trends and patterns. So we see some people that might do an offense that is directly police related, but also have a complaint by their family member that they're doing something at home. And so we're looking at the whole person. And so we don't pick and choose what cases you guys review. We just get the number and speak to it to say this is what the level of property is. And then you guys can decide whether there's sufficient information to push it forward or not. But the arbitrator beforehand and prejudge anything, because like I said, it could be a case where this is one case in a pattern of other cases that have allegations. We've seen several names that keep popping up, and I suppose Mr. Master about it, and he confirmed to me that Internal Affairs is also monitoring those same individuals. They're on their list as well, so we didn't push it any further in that realm, but it is something that we like to use as a monitoring tool, because sometimes there are repeat offenders and they're not just doing police related activities. So that's how that case may have gotten to you, is because we're not the clearinghouse to say, oh yeah, this is worth sending up, this is not. Everything's worth sending up. It's just about what priority we give to it. That's what we're doing.
Yeah, and I understand that. I think that's a valid point. You look for trends, for repeat offenders anyway, and there were some, it didn't seem to be like a bigger pattern or practice kind of thing with this gentleman, in my opinion. But again, we discuss that as our working group, and I think we need to do that soon and get this, get this adjudicated as soon as we can.
Will be the Kathy. I'll start off and if you can add some additional comments.
Sure.
We looked at case 25 431. Yeah, 25 240. And what we focused on, the case involved a officer involved in a situation on 6th Street where it appears that he threw a punch and knocked someone unconscious without help. And what we focused on was trying to develop some framework in which to look at it, so we can know where to start, where to go. That framework was obviously what is the situation. Then we wanted to see if there were any mitigating circumstances that would warrant of their history, or their history of behavior or history of policy. Then we want to ask the threshold question, was this something deserving of this? Whether rather than in a file or even further, and then from there, what I have some notes here that say the eight recommended extension. We wanted to know though if they were in this particular case. What are the levels of discipline? What's the range of levels of discipline?
Yes,
You agree?
yes, I
Yeah.
still have.
Yeah, what is the range of discipline that we can choose from? Because in that suspension, which is based on determination. Okay.
Yes, that's, I think that was where we left off in our discussion was, my understanding is we agree, we were all in agreement there should be some sort of discipline. But we were still, discussing what that should be. And, yes, I'm still familiarizing myself with what, like what they did in the past for this situation. For some guidance on what's typically expected as discipline for this type of behavior and these types of what's the word I'm looking for, infractions. But yes, it was an officer. It was history, and we were by our last case. I can be more lenient than what the options are for disciplinary recommendations.
Yeah, that is a clarification. I believe I looked at it. APD said everything up to indefinite suspension. I think APO came down and said no, we indefinite suspension.
Yes, we were. To levels of discipline, to make sure.
Oh, yes.
And one of the things I think we may have to put an email, we have what we call the cheat sheet, which is disciplines.
Yes,
That would be helpful. What to do without knowing what the levels of discipline. They have to get out with
Different classes of discipline. CPD is usually the matrix. If it's a class A type of something that discipline may be suspension up to termination, it may be promotion, it may be transfer. Those are the most severe cases.
what's up, retraining.
That's more like there's two ways they look at it. In some cases, it's a level of discipline you need. I don't think it's the training discipline based, training is through education. Make sure you know what policies.
They want to have go over what the levels
I wanted to present maybe the devil's advocate. I actually looked at this case in so much detail too, and because I had the same question, what was this? Just violently strike something like that. And one of my community members, when I looked at this all people count, one of the things about the always decide to go most of the time. And I wondered what some of the say. I told him, okay, I'll change people's view. Kind of justify the comment. Correct. Yes, and I looked at that. You more and more apart. Young people that very professional and it's all is there a way of salvaging, of helping him this work there? It's a failure. There's $100,000, $500,000 getting somebody to the family, and then you put them on the road and they fail, and you don't have a way of trying to train them to make sure that doesn't happen again. That's the problem. And so this is the other side of the story where you see the violence occurring, and then you ask yourself why. But still, I think we need to look at it. What can we do to help these young, rookies to learn how to live? You guys get to
No.
Yes, I just have one more thing to say about our yes, the council going on the current case that was on the very long. He's the, from my understanding, he's new-ish. And the first one,
like it's a rating, he's fired.
oh, okay.
So, some of the cases we do, but I think the value is for me to see how we're going to come to this perspective for bringing and so how we move to the bringing, we have different things, how you what we so a recommendation and even the investigation. Everything that one sees, I would strongly recommend it. So yeah, there's a lot of films. Don't have to look at all of them. We see the investigation. Not only one.
Yeah, to your point, Commissioner Briggs, I would say that some things are a training issue, some things are a compliance issue, and if we say that there is more training needed, so maybe they do deserve some grades, there has to be follow through though, and to ensure that that structure exists. And if you think about it, like the new officer versus the seasoned officer, seasoned officer probably seen the situation so many times that they know how to react. New officer just acting impulsively, probably because they may be, scared. And so I think a more deliberate conversation would be how can we pair the seasoned officer with the newer officers more often to avoid such situations. And then even as the situation begins, I've seen video evidence where the seasoned officer come over and like, nobody, we're not doing that. This is not how we're handling the situation. And so I think when we are deliberating, we should bring up like ways to present suggestions to better those situations, even if the outcome may have been adjudicated. Because you're right, that is a lot of money gone, and there's a lot of training, I won't say wasted, but it's not being utilized. And at the same time, you don't want people behaving like that within the community, and everybody may not deserve the second chance, but if people can be retrained, and you can show the value in that retraining, and you can show people what you're doing to ensure that it's not happening again, I think it's more tolerable to have to say those things and do those things as opposed to just saying, well, we don't want to lose another officer, so we're going to retain them or we get rid of every officer that has it. It shouldn't be a zero-sum game either way. It should be like some gray area.
And I hear you, but I said on foundation. On the Iowa, the young 4 months after the case, young lady, they were on 3 feet of staff that were dead. And the police came, came in, fortunately somebody called. We know that they would trust that the police had. So they called, came in, rescued the young lady, or helped her, right? When I think about these movies, sometimes it's like watching streaming, and you come to the end, you don't get to see how it ends. So I don't know if she survived or not. But I do know that one of the conditions that came to the same officer was that he went and started canvassing the area and went and tried to ask people for information. And maybe because whatever that, he used her skills and got somebody to tell him. Use that, then it will say, we're looking for somebody who looks like this. And lo and behold, they were able to capture a perpetrator. Now, this is a community where, snitches, snitches get stitches. And still, he managed to do this. And commendation came and it was nice to see, 4 or 5 months into his thing, he had something like that. So I looked at that and said, well, what a loss, because I believe that not anybody could have done what he did there. So they sort of sheep some nice talents, but then it's almost like a tale of 2 cops, tale of 2 policemen, because there's this other one. And once again, the tragedy and the loss to us as a community of having somebody who could potentially be a great policeman. So that's the thing I'm I want to encourage that we're going to bring to the table our views as individuals and as have different perspectives and views, and I think it's not minority reports also.
Yeah, absolutely, sir. I don't know if you all had an opportunity to look at the history as well of this. It was a combination.
Maybe that was one of the failings in the system to document that so there was notice.
Well, you looked at one case, and so you looked at the case that was the incident that occurred on 6th Street. So we as well, so we'll just speak to just that one incident that occurred. And so as we looked at the body worn cam, just like you all looked at the body worn cam, there's a number of officers that are responding to this issue. And one of the things that was really relevant regarding this is that there were several officers that were dealing with several of the same things that Sheriff Reeves talked about. People were throwing bottles, people kicking, all of these things, and the manner in which they were able to address those issues. We had one officer who could clearly just take the person that was knocked unconscious, that was engaged, that individual, he simply put his hands on him and said, relax. But we don't know that it's very reasonable to believe that action in and of itself have de-escalated. And we couldn't identify going through some de-escalation with this person and this officer knocked him unconscious. It seemed unprovoked as well. What we did learn during this review was that there was this individual that there appeared to have been an attempt of the individual had put his leg out, but the officer who engaged in this behavior wasn't even aware of it. I want to look at it and try and determine whether or not that was something that occurred prior to this happening that there's really no excuse when you look at the behavior. You know, and just think about, you know, when you're crowd control, and when you look at the situation, the initial issue, I think you mentioned the officer who was engaged in the initial contact with the two individuals that was fighting. And that officer had used the use of force, but this was because there was some resisting going on. If you listen to the community members, one community member said, stop resisting, stop resisting. And then it wasn't until this officer comes over that was terminated and did this use of force where the crowd kind of ignited. And so we also look at what could potentially, where you just didn't have enough officers to control it or to manage it. And that would have been based on the fact, the actions of this officer. Because there has to be a level of emotional intelligence when you are dealing with a crowd of this size. And we have a large crowd, we have individuals who have been drinking, several persons that are intoxicated, and officers are trying to manage this crowd of persons. And when you have one officer that engages in this behavior, it takes the crowd to another level.
Is it customary to put new officers on 6th Street?
Well, let me say, this officer, I think, was working overtime. This
Right.
officer was actually working overtime, so this was not his normal sector
Right.
that he would have been working in. So this officer, 7 months on the force, and was working overtime. And so I'm guessing that, you know, that contributed to an officer being in an environment. The entertainment district is a challenging district. It's a challenging environment for even the seasoned officers who have been on the force for a very long time. And so this officer had elected to work overtime in this particular on this particular night. So and so again, as we are looking at this, we have to consider what would have happened as well. That was part of the consideration as we saw the crowd start to escalate. At one point, the crowd had calmed down, and then this happened, and then all of a sudden the crowd erupts. And so you also have to think about the risk for those other officers who are in that area. And we really increased the risk for those officers. And I looked at my cam, the thing that I was grateful for was that this did not go to a level that it could have gone to. And where officers would have been compelled to use a level of force had this crowd just erupted and gotten out of control. And that did not happen that night. Again, I watched several, not just the officers that engaged in the behavior, but all the other officers that were dealing with the same thing and the manner in which they were able to speak to, you know, community members. One officer who said, look, stop, just go home. Just go home. And immediately the individuals start to turn and leave the space. And it's that kind of engagement we need to have when you are dealing in a downtown area with persons who many times coming out of clubs, there is a lot of drinking. We have a younger crowd of individuals there, and there really has to be this level of emotional intelligence as you deal with these individuals. Yes, I agree. There was bottle throwing and water throwing and, you know, all kinds of things that were happening, but I could not identify anything that provoked that behavior. There was nothing there. In fact, the officer had actually arrested someone else and was detained someone else and should have just escorted them wherever he was escorting them, and he turned and engaged in behavior, and it was unacceptable. It was unacceptable. That person.
one thing we also look at, actually get so far with the training that anyone have received just so we actually do most of the cases we look at. Question is if they're training, if there are some episodes so far based on the training, it just you can't retrain on that. Officers get more time force tactics, anything else. So
Yeah.
you know, when I look at an issue of excessive force at this level, that's not a training issue.
Yeah, just be sure that the when they when I see it, that Nick wants to say of Officer Ledger,
What's the protocol for when we use personal proprietary information? Does should we be
body camera, one of the body cameras, look at one of the body cameras, you actually see that individual kicking and trying to trip an officer. I guess what you're telling me that was not the officer, it was another officer, not the, we believe it was not the provoked, it was not the officer that ended up punching, it was another officer.
No, it actually was the officer that ended up punching him, but what we learned was that he was not aware that that individual had done that.
What happens is, I'm sorry, when I hear the testimony, like, he's overwhelmed, he doesn't even know where he got hit and what he, so that's not unusual to me. In that, I would say I was more afraid of the crowd that we took up from the incident makes me think, oh, it's not so sometimes I think it's a scary environment for somebody else. But so yeah, but he was, I believe, and you know, but I respect if you share what I saw. Give a little more, if they got 24 year or 25 year old guy. So, and that's why we're looking for training. Is there anything?
Say is every police officer, no one necessarily trains the public what to do. Every police officer trains the service on certain cycles. So when I hear quite frequently, well, they did this.
No, he's not that career. To the point where Mr. Masters and Ms. McCann spoke about is there also has to be some individual responsibility because I feel like we give a lot of deference to the police. We talk about their mental health. We talk about all these things where we defer to their judgment and even at a reasonable officer standard, no other officer in that same situation reacted that way. So he should be held accountable under just even those basic standards, in my opinion.
They're really considering the risk of his peers, based on what